Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 298. Shi Shengpeak. A man is not as good as the heavens. The rain drummed on the eaves. In the silence, Shi Mei took a sip of tea and, as if he had made some sort of decision, said, "Let me show you something." He took out a rusted copper mirror from his kinkin bag. The edge of the mirror was carved with a flying phoenix, a roaming dragon, and the universe was carved with the sun, moon, and constellations. This mirror is called the mirror of the day before. It is a relic of my father. My father's surname is Mu. Shizun should have guessed it already. Mu Yanli and I are siblings from same father but different mother. As he finished speaking, he bit his finger and dripped blood onto the mirror. The mirror began to get foggy, and when the fog dissipated, a hazy image appeared on the mirror. The illusions gradually formed, forming a clear scene and a face. It was the pavilion of the Tianyan Pavilion. In the picture, it was a scorching summer day. Under the pavilion, there were lotus blossoms blooming in the lotus pond and red dragonflies were flying low. A noblewoman dressed in luxurious clothing stood next to the rail board, a cinnabar mark on her fingers. She was currently feeding a plate of pastries to the fishes, and the pool was filled with light because of that. This woman was very delicate and elegant, but she also looked very cold. When she turned around to speak to the attendant, he could see that she had a pair of auspicious phoenix-like eyes. Chu Wanning frowned, looked at her, and then looked up at Shi Mei. "She's not my mother." Shi Mei seemed to see through Chu Wanning's doubts and smiled. "She is Yanli Ji's biological mother from the Lin family." Not long after, a young woman dressed in a silk dress and a Tianyan pavilion maid entered the scene in the bronze mirror. She was only around 17 or 18 years old, with a gentle and virtuous face. Shi Mei gently stroked the mirror and said, "This is my mother." She was the descendant of the Lord of Huabi, Songxing II. Gai Yuye had raised her like an animal and hadn't given her a name. After she escaped, she wanted to give herself a name, but Song is the surname of the butterfly-boned beauty feast, so she didn't dare to take it. So she used Huabi's homonym and since then called herself Huagui. To return home means that after my mother found out that the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan could return to the demon world, she had hoped to bring all of her clansmen home. In the mirror, she was speaking respectfully and gently to Madame Lin. Chu Wanning noticed that the Lin matriarch had always been cold on the scene and the other maids were all in fear of her. Only Huagui had a sweet smile on her face as she gave her utmost sincerity to her mistress. Chu Wanning looked up. How did she enter the Tianyan pavilion? It was that high-level disciple from the Tianyan pavilion who helped her. Actually, what was written in the records was not the truth. After escaping from Gai Yuye, my mother didn't leave his side. He was so passionately infatuated with my mother that she managed to beg him to find a way to release her people. That disciple listened to everything she said and thus stole the Tianyan pavilion seed of fire and helped her. Chu Wanning felt a small crease in his forehead and thought to himself, so, that's it? The records in the history books were not always correct. Some truths would slowly be eroded by the flow of time. When the people of that era were old and no longer cared, no one would know what really happened in the past. After 2 years, the cultivation world has gradually forgotten about the incident with Gai Yuye's fire incident. It just so happened that Madame Lin of the Tianyan pavilion gave birth to a daughter. Madame Lin was eccentric and was not good at taking care of children. Therefore, she needed the help of a few quick-wit young ladies. That disciple took this opportunity to bring my mother into the pavilion. From then on, my mother became the Lin clan's maid. Hearing this, Chu Wanning looked back at the bronze mirror. It was unknown when the mirror's surface had changed. Madame Lin was reading by the window and Huagui was standing by her side, holding a baby in her arms and coaxing her wholeheartedly. At first glance, the scene looked very soft. The mistress was graceful, the servant girl was loyal, and the child was delicate and innocent. However, after careful consideration, he felt a surge of emotions. She later took over from Lady Linear. Right. After staying in the Tianyan pavilion for a long time, my mother has seen through this sex transcendent status in the cultivation world. At that time, she was still somewhat naive and came up with a plan that she thought was better than returning to the demon realm. What? Become the madam of the Tianyan pavilion. A descendant of a deity, their words are worth 1,000 gold. She thought that as long as the pavilion master can open his mouth, no one in the cultivation realm will harm her anymore, at least no one will blatantly harm the butterfly-boned beauty feast. The light and shadows changed, the bronze rust on the mirror retorted darkly. It was still the original viewing platform, but it was already an unknown year of winter. Below the stage, the lotus flowers had all withered and died. No dragonflies, no red carp in the pool. Those bright creatures and the cold beauty of the past, the Lin clan, had all disappeared. It was replaced by the flying snow, the faint fragrance of winter plums, and the back of a woman wearing a thick white fox fur coat. After a while, a man approached and she looked back, her beautiful face caged in the fine, flapping fur of a fox. She smiled at him, the new snow fading. At this moment, it was unknown what methods Huagui used to remove the original madam of the Tianyan pavilion. Madame Lin died not long after. The disciple who had helped her in the past was also dead. She finally got what she wanted and became the madam of the pavilion master of the Tianyan pavilion, the descendant of the gods. The sky was a leaden gray with heavy snow. Huagui walked up to her husband, congratulated him, and then smiling, reached out her hand to stroke the hair of the little girl beside him. "It's Mu Yanli." She Mei laughed, "Yes. Shizun, don't you understand why Yanli Ji, as a daughter of the Lin clan, only cares about my mother and doesn't care about her own mother?" Chu Wanning ignored the question and continued to observe the situation in the mirror. At that time, Mu Yanli was at most 4 or 5 years old. She was carried by Huagui without the slightest resistance. She was even hugging Huagui's delicate neck and laughing heartily as if she was having fun with his stepmother. Madame Lin was a depressed, silent woman who held no fondness for children. She Mei continued. After Yanli Ji was born, her illness became more and more serious to the point that she could injure or maim herself. Once, when my mother wasn't watching, she took the scissors and stabbed the back of Yanli Ji's hand 4 or 5 times. When my mother came back, it was her who saved Yanli Ji, who was crying beyond consolation. A mother who would stab her child to death and a mother who had taken care of her since she was young, Yanli Ji chose the latter. The scene changed. There was a thin layer of frost outside the window, sticking to the blessings of longevity. Should be a year after the spring festival, Huagui sat at a small rosewood table to write. Beside him sat 2 children, a boy and a girl. The girl was tall and cold while the boy had gentle eyes. They were Hua Binan and Mu Yanli from when they were children. "All right." Huagui smiled as she picked up the piece of paper and blew on it, before smiling, "Look at your mother's drawing of the medicine sex elixir manuals. It's not bad, isn't it?" Mu Yanli still had a childish voice as she said in a high-pitched voice, "Mother, of course it's nice." Shi Mei was even younger, so he didn't even know how to sound like a child. He could only sit at his original spot and smack his fingers while watching the 2 of them laughing merrily. My father was obsessed with his cultivation and he was usually neglectful towards me and my sister. Our education was personally being handled by my mother. Looking at the scene in the mirror, Shi Mei recalled, she taught us how to read and write, as well as some basic spells. She can use spell. Just a little. Shi Mei paused for a moment. Little tricks that could frighten the common people, but I'm afraid can't even beat the weakest cultivator. But she's willing to accompany us, to stay with us day and night. Sighing, Shi Mei's gaze became a little stiff. No matter how she plans and works, how she treats outsiders. But she treats me and my sister with such kindness. The scene on the surface of the mirror spun faster and faster, as if time had slipped past the gaps between his fingers like a shuttle of water. In many of these situations, Mu Yanli and Shimei gradually grew up. And in the process, almost every step of the brother and sister was watched by Huagui. On a stormy night, she coaxed Mu Yanli to sleep. One afternoon in the middle of summer, she fed Shimei with red bean and coconut soup. All of these things happened bit by bit. Later on, when I reached the age of enlightenment, my father personally taught me the techniques of the Tianyan Pavilion. However, my talent was lacking and I was unable to learn them. He was very disappointed. At that time, I also thought that I was a useless person. After all, Yanli Ji had successfully reached foundation stage when she was 8 years old. And even after I put in all my effort, I don't even feel the slightest bit of qi. The little Shimei sat by the pond in a daze, a smaller sword resting on his small knees. Huagui dragged the long robes with a frown on her face as she walked over the wooden bridge. She looked around and found the child who was alone and lost in thought. Her anxious expression finally relaxed. She walked to his side, bent down and said a few words to him. Then she carried him in her arms and walked back to the end of the garden. Because she had once stayed in Gaiyuye for a long time, she had seen many people with weak spiritual energy who could gain a place in the cultivation world through the medicine sect. She did not overturn everything in one blow just because of Gaiyuye's abuse of the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan. She persuaded father to let me start cultivating the way of medicine. Previously, when Shimei told him about the intimate relationships between men and women, Chu Wanning knew that Huagui had some tricks up her sleeve. However, he did not know how strong she was, so he was unable to say. And when he heard that, he could suddenly feel the sharpness of this woman. To her, Gaiyuye was just like a hellish nightmare, devouring the first half of her life. If it were any other person, even if they didn't hate the medicine sect to the bone, they would still dislike the medicine sect. However, she was very clear about what the medicine sect was, what she needed and how she was supposed to do it. She had a pair of extremely calm eyes. Even if her hatred was as deep as the sea, she would not act rashly. Her plans have always been methodical. One step at a time, she might have already thought of the next 100 steps. So apart from taking care of me and Yanli Ji, she still has the energy to go around gathering the whereabouts of her clansmen. However, it was obvious that the status of the butterfly-boned beauty feast remained unchanged. Moreover, Chu Wanning remembered that this Madame Hua had passed away a long time ago. There must be a hidden meaning behind this. Chu Wanning had a vague conjecture in mind as to what was going on with the butterfly-boned beauty feast and the descendant of the god race. He asked, later on, Madame Hua's identity, was it exposed? Shimei didn't immediately reply. His eyes shined with an overly bright light. At first glance, it looked extremely sharp, like a deep hatred. But on closer look, it was like the sadness of the tide. It shouldn't have been exposed. He said, father has no brains at all and can't tell what's wrong with mother at all. But no matter what, he is still a descendant of the deity. Even though the god race's blood in his body is minuscule, he still has some innate ability to sense it. He lowered his eyes and looked at the mirror. The scene had already shifted to the pavilion master's room, where a man with slight spots on his temples was lying in bed. When I was 9 years old, this man had a very strange illness. Even the best doctors could not find out the cause of the illness. Shimei sneered, actually, after knowing the inside information, you should know very well. He is a descendant of the Divine Queen and my mother is a descendant of the Infernal Queen. After the war between the gods and demons, the demon lord had laid down a curse from that day onwards, for generations to come, gods and demons cannot join hands. Those who break this curse will die for sure. Father's strange illness was caused by this ancient curse but it was unknown to him. As for the heavenly realm, perhaps it was due to pity or perhaps it was because it wanted to embarrass the demon lord. Anyway, one night, in a dream, a god spoke to my father and told him exactly what had happened. Furthermore, he said that if he wants to survive, he need to sever all ties with the witch. Chu Wanning looked at Shi Mei's ferocious face, waiting for him to continue. He knew that things were definitely not as simple as cutting it in two. After he woke up from the dream, my father was furious, said Shi Mei. The Tianyan Pavilion had always wanted everything to go their way, and his status in the cultivation world was extraordinary. Everyone treated him as a god and respected him. But this woman, this piece of rotten meat that looks like a pig or dog to be butchered, and is a dual cultivation furnace, to think that she would actually scheme against him, use him, and deceive him. She even almost killed him. How vicious. So. He took in a deep breath. No matter how well he had suppressed his emotions, his voice was still hoarse. He held the teacup tightly. The tea was already cold, so he did not finish it. With a thought, he exerted too much force and the porcelain cup exploded with a bang. The cold tea splattered everywhere. The surface of the mirror had also been splashed with tea. The image was blurred by the amber color of the tea. One could vaguely see that the man on the sickbed had summoned Huagui. He walked barefoot out of bed, pretended to not be wary of her, and walked to the door with a smile. With his back to Huagui, he closed and locked the door. The man turned to his wife. In the distorted mirror light and water stains, a face that looked like a leopard surfaced. Shi Mei suddenly trembled. He abruptly reversed the mirror and turned his back on the mirror, no longer looking at the mirror. The veins on the back of his hand bulged like tree roots of a coiled dragon. Fear and hatred surged through every blood vessel. After a long moment, he buried his face in his hands. His voice sounded extremely exhausted. He only said one word before stopping. This beast. It was as if there was a monstrous flood of hatred that was about to be vented. It seemed as if there were thousands of words that wanted to be spit out. However, once the 10,000 horses and 1,000 armies reached its throat, it didn't know which words it should say first. He should have seen the scene in this mirror many times before, but after all this time, even after all these years, he still hated it. Slowly he stopped shaking. In the end, the hatred turned into a seemingly ordinary sentence. On that day, my father ate my mother alive. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 299. Shi Shangpeak. Life is hard to stop. Looking at Chu Wanning's pale face, Shi Mei laughed maniacally and said, "Yes, my father ate my mother alive. While she was still breathing. I was near at the time. Hearing her screams, I ran over. I didn't know what had happened, so I anxiously knocked on the door. I asked mother what had happened. No one answered me. She's been screaming from the other side of the door." His thin lips parted and he said, then the door was opened. Dead silence. It was probably the same as the deathly stillness when the door was opened. His mouth was full of blood. His arms tore at his mother's mangled body. He was like a child whose spirit soul had been split apart. 9 years old. His father had already gone mad. The flesh and blood of a butterfly-boned beauty feast could nourish a person's cultivation base. Since he was on the verge of death, she should repay him. Even this evil creature in front of him. A vile creature that would make him suffer a retribution. A demon child. He held out his sticky hand to the child, who was cold to the point of not being able to say a word. His eyes were wild and twisted. At that moment, Shi Mei didn't even have the time to react. He stared blankly at the scene in front of him. There was neither grief nor fear in his eyes. It was as if he had been sucked dry, leaving an empty shell poking into the ground. The man's hand moved closer and closer, and a drop of warm blood fell on his cheek, like a tear mark. He raised his head and stared blankly at this unfamiliar wraith. "Father! Run!" Behind him, Huagui's piercing scream pierced through the clouds. "Anan, run! One of her arms was torn off by the blade, the tendons and bones of her legs were broken, and the woman was crazily squirming on the ground like a maggot. Run! Run! Don't look back! Don't come back! Ah! In response, the man suddenly turned around and stomped his foot hard on her face. Huagui tilted her head, a golden tear trickling down from the corner of her eye. She tried her best to say, "Run." Kaka. Her throat was broken. "Run," she said. Every day, every hour, every morning, every night, he would run crazily out of the Tianyan pavilion and into the vast mountains. If he didn't run, he would not be able to take it any longer and would collapse. He ran until he collapsed. No matter where he fled to, no matter how many years had passed, he could still hear his mother's shrill, terrible scream, "Run! Run!" He ran from the depths of the alley into the vast wilderness, through the golden waves of wheat, from the depths of darkness to the arrow of dawn ripping through the universe as the world turned a soft crimson. Like blood. Blood oozing out of her body, slowly dripping from the corner of his mouth. Ah! Ah! His shoes had long since fallen off, his feet were worn and swollen, the gravel had sunk in and the blood was bubbling. Golden tears finally ran down his cheeks. He ran like a cornered beast through the decaying grass and reeds, cutting his legs and feet in two. He didn't dare to stop. He didn't dare to see which way was right. He could only try to run forward. He didn't dare to stop. He would die. If he stop, he will die. He did not stop. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 years had passed. They will die. The butterfly-boned beauty feast race will die if they don't go home. Later on, I was picked up by sect leader Shui. At that time, the Tianyan pavilion master was searching for my whereabouts. I didn't dare to speak the truth nor did I dare to cry. He asked me where I came from, where my parents were, and I lied to him. After that, he brought me back to Shisheng Peak. A few years later, a member of the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan who was once saved by my mother managed to find me. She was a disciple of Tianyan Pavilion and in order to not be suspected by others, she personally destroyed her own face when she entered the pavilion. She escaped my father's eyes and gave me all my mother's things. According to the records in the demon language that my mother had collected over the years, there is a thick basket of books on the butterfly-boned beauty feast's name, buds of 8 sufferings and everlasting hatred flower and the method of how to open the doors to the demon realm that she once researched. Chu Wanning closed his eyes slowly. So you took the path she wanted to take, and did what she was intending to do. Yes. I continued to cultivate the path of the medicine sect. In order to not arouse the suspicion of the sect leader, all those years when I ventured out of the mountains using my full name, Hua Binan. Hua Binan's reputation was getting higher and higher. It got so high that even Zhang Shi noticed me. He extended his hand towards me and I did the same thing as my mother did all those years ago. Even though the sect once treated the butterfly-boned beauty feast as animals, even though it had been wary of my mother for a long time, in order to have a place in the cultivation world as soon as possible and to get everything I needed to go back home, I promised myself. From then on, I had kept 2 identities, a disciple of Shi Shengpeak and the Gai Yu Yezhan Lin. Shi Mei paused for a moment before continuing. Later on, the pavilion master of the Tianyan pavilion died and Yan Liji took over his position. She had been constantly searching for the culprit who had killed her stepmother. In the beginning, I didn't dare to trust anyone anymore, but after a few attempts, I finally decided to meet her at the Tianyan pavilion and told her the whole story. Speaking to this point, Shi Mei smiled, although his eyes were still cold, as Shizun has seen. I didn't make a mistake, she's on my side. Although she is not a butterfly-boned beauty feast, she saw my mother as her true mother and her race as her own. She's been helping me all these years. Helping Hua Binan. Helping Shi Mei. Helping her half-brother. When Shi Mei finished, he put the broken pieces of the teacup away and returned the mirror back to the kinkan bag. The rain outside was like the souls of the butterfly-boned beauty feast who had died in the past tens of thousands of years. There was probably Hwagoi there too, his mother. She was screaming, "Run! Run, run! Don't stop, don't look back. There is no way out." In the end, Shimei rubbed his face with exhaustion and said in a hoarse voice, "Shizun, we have no way out. It's either we destroy the humans or us, that is the only choice. I can't choose the latter." It was like the end of the world. It was like a bayonet or lightning splitting through the air. The sound of rapid rain, the sound of thousands of horses galloping, the glossy leaves soaking in the ground, all in the bright, dazzling light. Suddenly, the door opened with a bang and a strong wind wrapped around the rainstorm. The pale white lightning illuminated the two people who had turned around towards the hall. Mu Yanli was standing in front of the doorstep. She did not hold an umbrella and her entire body was soaked through. Her eyes appeared extremely messy. "Anan, we still need the last 30 pieces of Zhenlong chess pieces before we reach the entrance of the demon realm." Before she could finish speaking, Shimei suddenly stood up, and his fingertips trembled uncontrollably. "Where's Taxian Jun?" 30 pieces of Zhenlong chess is but a split second to him, almost allowing him to complete them all at once. At this point, he suddenly stopped. When Mu Yanli entered the room, Chu Wanning could see that other than joy, there was also terror on her face. "I don't know what happened to Taxian Jun, but he suddenly fainted. And his heart is also." "What?" "It was extremely unstable. His spiritual core is collapsing, as though it will never wake up again." Shimei suddenly became angry. "Impossible. That's his own spiritual core. I have fabricated it over 1,000 times, how could it suddenly collapse?" He stopped. Suddenly, as if he had seen a ghost, he turned his head with a pale face, and turned towards Chu Wanning, who was on the bed with his hands and feet tied up. Could it be? His lips trembled, opening and closing. Could it be? "You did it?" The sound of the storm outside only made the room quieter. It was like a tomb, like a dark abyss. The light and shadow of the candlestick were like the silk of a banner, dancing in a hidden and mysterious manner. In the dead silence, Chu Wanning closed his eyes and opened them. "Right. It was me." A boom resounded. The thunder seemed as if it was going to shatter the clouds, causing the earth to shake and the mountains to shake. The rain poured down like a waterfall. Shimei's heart trembled as he staggered a step forward. You can still. Now that you've told me about you. Then let me tell you something about me too. Shimei. In my other life, my spiritual core was destroyed and I only had the power of Juga left. That's why I was powerless to fight against Taxian Jun. A golden light suddenly appeared on his wrist and there was only a crisp metallic sound as the chains holding him broke and the spiritual talismans were set ablaze. Chu Wanning stood up on his bed and raised his beautiful eyes. But on this life, the days when he placed me under house arrest were enough for me to bury the incantation deep in his heart. When he said those words, Chu Wanning's face was expressionless. Grief, pain, pity, regret. There's nothing but a deathly tranquility. The spell will continue to erode deeper and deeper, eventually causing his spirit to flow and his heart to stop beating. Your godly weapon will still be destroyed by me. Sorry, Hua Binan. I can't let you go home. Shimei couldn't have expected this turn of events. His face was whiter than jade and colder than ice. He stared at Chu Wanning in disbelief, his lips trembling. It's over. As Chu Wanning spoke, the light in his palms intensified. You're crazy. Shimei looked at that golden light and suddenly went mad, his eyes filled with a wild beast's look. You want to kill him. You actually want to kill him. You have the heart, you have the heart. No one could see the emotion that flowed in his dark eyes. I do. Chu Wanning replied. The golden light grew brighter and brighter, but Chu Wanning's expression became uglier and uglier. Even though he was only a broken branch of the Yan Emperor's divine wood, he still had a vague impression of many of the divine wood's spells. This included Tianwen's 10,000 coffins, which also originated from the vague outline in his brain. He had thought it was a coincidence, but then he realized it wasn't. As a divine wood himself, he had been left with many imprints by Sheneng. As long as he tried to recall, he would be able to recall many ancient secret arts, such as the gate of time and space, life and death, and the corpse-splitting technique that he had used just now for the first time. The corpse-splitting technique was related to the war between the gods and demons in the prehistoric era. According to legends, after that battle, the human race on the continent suffered a great number of casualties. Those who survived struggled in the sea of corpses and soon became infected by an epidemic disease. At that time, Fuxi had wholeheartedly wanted to exterminate all of the demons, while Nuwo had fallen into a deep slumber due to her injuries. The only person left to save the world was Sheneng. Therefore, Sheneng inserted a stalk of the Yan Emperor Divine Wood into the East Extreme Sea. There were thousands of branches and hundreds of millions of flowers and fruits growing in the depths of the abyss. Divine Wood, 10,000 coffins. The moment he finished speaking, the roots of the Yan Emperor Divine Wood spread out from the bottom of the East Sea, covering the entire cultivation world in an instant. Those coarse or slender, rough or soft roots must be uprooted and silted. Slaughter the corpse and collect the coffin. The roots wrapped around the rotting corpses on the ground and turned them into ashes. The rotting corpses in the sky and earth had disappeared. Their ashes had turned into fertile ground and fresh flowers had bloomed on it. The Yan Emperor Divine Wood had accomplished the first thing it had done in the mortal world. After that, it had retracted hundreds of millions of its roots back to the Eastern Sea. This was the oldest record of the Yan Emperor's Divine Wood in the annals of history. Chu Wanning's eyes lit up in excitement. This was Sheneng's spell. He could do it because he was a part of the Yan Emperor's Divine Wood. Now that he had activated his technique, that person. Soon there would be nothing left. Just a corpse. Chu Wanning was in extreme pain as he thought of that. He couldn't bear to part with it. You. Chu Wanning, you. Shi Mei stared at him, anger and madness flashing through his eyes. His plans for 2 lifetimes were unraveling here and he could no longer remain calm. Stop it. Hearing this voice, Chu Wanning raised his head and looked at him quietly, just like that rainy day many years ago when he saw a child standing under an awning on Shi Sheng Peak. At that time, he never would have thought that Shi Mei's identity was actually that of a butterfly-boned beauty feast on the run. His initial impression of Shi Mei was entirely based on the words of others. He had heard that a new child had appeared at the Shi Sheng Peak. That child had always been diligent in his studies, but unfortunately, his spiritual core was too weak to cast any spells. Moreover, because his talent was too poor, no elder was willing to accept him as a disciple. Even Elder Suanji had tactfully refused him after testing his spiritual root. That year, the rain dripped down from the black tile roof. The boy, who was like a lotus, helplessly looked up as he held a stack of thick books in his arms. Chu Wanning was a little taken aback. It's you. He recognized the unsociable child and walked over to him with the oil paper umbrella in his hand. Ah, Elder Yu Heng. The youth was startled and hurriedly bowed his head in salute, the book stacked to his chin causing him to stagger. Greetings, Elder. It's so late and you're still at the academy. I had no choice. I needed to look at a lot of things but I didn't have the time to finish reading them. Chu Wanning lowered his eyes, his gaze landing on the. Because of this, the child appeared a little embarrassed. My aptitude is not very good, so I can only take a look at the content of the medicine sect. I thought that Gai Yuye text was better. Chu Wanning was a little confused. He frowned and said, "It's just a book, what's there to be nervous about?" The child lowered his head even further. My mistake. His slim body kept its position low, making him look pitiful as if he didn't want to attract attention. Chu Wanning could not help but recall a conversation about him. That Shi Mei is very obedient, but he doesn't have much talent. What a pity. In truth, he isn't suitable for cultivation. Sigh, even the sect leader don't know what he is thinking. Why bother taking in someone with no intelligence to cultivate with? If you pity him, it would be better for him to go to Menpo Hall and get a job washing vegetables and cooking. However, he seems to be interested in medical cultivation. Elder Tanlang, are you not going to consider accepting him? Elder Tanlang said lazily, he's too soft, I don't like him, I won't accept him. An umbrella stretched forward, and raindrops fell like pearls onto the oiled paper. The jade-colored knuckles gripped the handle of the umbrella as the bones were still. Chu Wanning lightly said to the child, let's go, it's getting late. I'll send you off. A small white flower in full bloom was trembling on the eaves. Shi Mei was stunned for a moment. He first bowed, then hid in the shadow of the oil paper umbrella. In the slanting wind and drizzling rain, they disappeared into the distance. Shi Mei's eyes were bloodshot, his entire body was taut like a broken bowstring as he shouted angrily, Chu Wanning. Why are you interfering? At this point, what use is there for you to stop me? What should be killed has already been killed and only the last 30 lives are required. As long as 30 people died, so many of the butterfly-boned beauty feast would be able to live for over 1,000 years. They can finally return to the demon realm. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? He was like a blind dragon with a broken claw. That face no longer had the gentle shadow of the past. If you were to destroy Taxian Jun, the dead cultivators wouldn't be able to survive either. If you were to destroy him, there is no hope in this mortal world. You. Chu Wanning said, before the heavenly retribution arrived, it's impossible to save this mortal world by sealing the rift, but the other one can still be saved. I just want another 30 lives. None of them should be missing anymore. Chu Wanning closed his eyes, the light in his palm instantly brightened to the extreme, Tianwen, 10,000 coffins. It was as if the god had bound the corpse. As he shouted, the sound of the earth could be heard from afar. His palm suddenly closed. In the far back of the mountain, the unconscious Taxian Jun was already tightly bound by willow vines. Shi Mei's lips turned white, and his pupils shrunk down to a small dot. Why are you so ruthless? Not giving us our last chance to kill your own disciple? I only want 30 lives. One was covered in corpses, while the other one was filled with the wind and rain. It was unknown what sort of changes would occur after the door to the demon realm was opened. Ever since the ancient demons began fighting with bloodlust, they had turned traitor and fought fiercely with Fuxi to expel them from the mortal world. Chu Wanning was clear that this will not just end with 30 lives. Even if it was just 30 lives, who would deserve to die? Who should pave the way for the return journey of butterfly-boned beauty feasts? Who should be sacrificed? The golden light in his palm grew brighter and it was reflected in Shi Mei's eyes. It seemed like the light was going to dig out his lungs. He was so angry that he wanted to move forward, but a barrier was raised in front of Chu Wanning. He couldn't get through. Without Taxian Jun, Shi Mei was like a butcher who had lost his sharp blade, leaving behind only a pair of paws. Both he and Mu Yanli was not a match for Chu Wanning. In his despair, Shi Mei's eyes turned red as if they were about to bleed. What should he do? What should he do? Suddenly, he remembered something. This caused the butcher, who looked like he was facing a fierce beast, to stagger towards his back and pull out his last sharp weapon. He pointed the weapon at the man who was determined to ruin his life. Good. Shizun, you sure are ruthless. Do it. Make your move. Chu Wanning didn't know why his attitude suddenly changed, but he suddenly put his hand on his forehead and laughed out loud. He then lowered his head to look at Chu Wanning's face and bit into every word on his face. Go on and do it, Shizun. Just cut him into pieces. The worst that could happen was neither of us will get any benefits and both of us will lose miserably. When Mu Yanli saw his crazed look, she could not help but feel a dull pain in her eyes. She whispered, Anan. At this time, Shimei could no longer listen to her words. He held that kind of out-of-control energy which came from a battle beast on the verge of death and said while baring his teeth, Go and kill him, kill him. After spitting out the venom and blood, Shimei's dead black eyes were focused on Chu Wanning as he pointed his fingers and said one word at a time. Along with the last wisp of his soul that was deeply infatuated with you. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 300. Shi Shengpeak. The Emperor's heart is like my heart. The thunder and lightning came in through the open door of the hall, illuminating half of Shimei's face. In the glaring light, only the eyes were dark. It seemed that even the god of fire couldn't light them up again. Chu Wanning's expression changed but he did not say anything. No matter what Shimei said, it was hard to fathom his intentions but even so, the light on his hands couldn't help but dim down. This sign was caught by Shimei. He grabbed onto the floating grass in the whirlpool and said to Chu Wanning, Shizun, you don't really think that Mo Ran is completely dead, do you? Do you really think that? Taxian Jun is just an empty husk. Pausing, he continued. Shizun, you might as well think about it. How could there be a corpse in this world that could think and act so stubbornly? Who could do it? How could it be done? Even Zhenlong chess is not like this. You know what? Shimei stared into Chu Wanning's eyes and slowly revealed the secret he was hiding. Inside Taxian Jun's body, there is still one sliver of consciousness that has yet to dissipate. Before he said that, Chu Wanning's eyes were empty as if he was a dead body walking. After saying this, Shimei could clearly see the waves in his phoenix eyes. He let out a sigh of relief but he still didn't dare to be careless. Shizun also knows that my spiritual core is weak. I can't cast any very powerful spells on my own. So I can't control the Zhenlong chess formation but the medicine sect has their own methods. When Shimei said this, it was as if he was looking at the corpse of Taxian Jun after he had committed suicide by taking poison. Lying in the grave in front of the sky-reaching pagoda. At that time, he didn't know what went wrong but his mind went blank. How could his sharp blade, his 100-war divine weapon, die? Mo Ran's conscience should have long been devoured by the 8 sufferings and everlasting hatred flower. What could torture his heart so much that he would kill himself? In the other life when the top 10 sects were attacking Shi Shengpeak together, after seeing Mo Ran's corpse, those people were planning to dismember his body into pieces. However, I tried my best to persuade them in the crowd as a Grand Master of the medicine sect that we should preserve that body. As he said every word he said, he was staring intently at Chu Wanning. I couldn't lose his power. So I managed to turn him into a walking dead. Although his abilities wouldn't be as good as when he was alive, he could at least make do with it for the time being. But you know, maybe it's because he was still missing someone before he died, so there's a little bit of obsession in his heart that's too strong for me to clear his soul into a clean slate. No matter what method I use to force the soul, that strand of soul will not dissipate. That strand of soul. His words were clear. Supported him as he walks confusedly towards the sky-reaching pagoda. A wisp of your soul. Stopping in his tracks, Shimei stood at the center of the hall. At this moment, he could already see the other's ashen face, tightly pursed lips and the meridians popping out from the back of his hand. He saw the pain and hesitation in Chu Wanning's heart, so he was completely relieved. Slowly, he regained his composure. That wisp of soul did not reincarnate and it was still lingering around Taxian Jun's corpse. That's why it was so stubborn towards you after it was revived. As for Grand Master Mo, you should also feel that he wasn't as attentive to you when he was reborn. His feelings for you were born again later. As Shimei narrated the truth of the matter, his expression kept changing. Taxian Jun has the most stubborn love for you in his previous life. He noticed that Chu Wanning's fingertips were trembling, so he licked his lips and took another step forward like a slippery snake. Shizun, look. Right now, I only need the last 30 people. 30 people would be enough to exchange for his life. Are you willing? Outside, the wind was howling and the demons were dancing wildly. He waited for Chu Wanning's reply, thinking, what a good deal this is. The man in front of him looked cold and otherworldly, but in reality, both of his lives had been ruined by the deep love in his heart. He was sure he would agree. After a while, Chu Wanning lowered his eyes. No one could see his expression clearly. You said that there is a strand of soul within his body. Yes. If you're given the last 30 people and let him finish paving your way home, are you just going to let him go? Yes. Chu Wanning did not answer immediately but mumbled, that's why, when we were reunited, much of what he said came from his heart. With a weak point, it was very easy to convince someone, even if it was the Baidu immortal. Shimei's victory was already in his hands, so he relaxed even more and said, yes, it's all from his heart. Although he was not the original and complete Mo Ran, at least he still has his soul. At least he still has his consciousness. Shizun, please listen to me once. He advised gently, don't do it. You, me, and him will all be much better off. Chu Wanning still did not look up. He sighed. Shi Mingjing. Do you still remember what your wish was when you entered the sect? He was somewhat at a loss at being asked like this, but after thinking for a bit, he still replied, I implored your pity. I needed a home. After he finished speaking, he had an ominous feeling as he added, however, back then, I really wanted to treat Shizun as my family. I'm not talking about the return of the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan. Chu Wanning did not deny it and asked again, then do you know what was Mo Ran's first wish when became my disciple? What is it? Chu Wanning finally raised his head and looked at Shimei. His eyes gradually became colder and the depth of the silence in his eyes was even deeper than before. He said he wanted to have a holy weapon like Tianwen. This way, more lives could be saved. The man spoke plainly and simply, as if he were speaking from home, explaining the wishes of his lover. Before Shimei could even react, he saw a golden light burst out from the hall and a strong wave of spiritual energy cut through the air, preventing others from getting close to it. Shimei snapped out of his daze and shouted, Chu Wanning. A sharp, twisted scream broke through the roof tiles. Chu Wanning. Are you crazy? You're crazy. Shimei was both furious and desperate. Under the blinding light, he tried his best to force his way towards the man in white in the middle. Beside him, Mu Yanli was helping him, supporting him, and trying to persuade him. But what good was that? Crack. Collect the coffins. Don't. Stop. Stop right there. Hearing the voice of Chu Wanning in the metallic wind, Shimei became even crazier. His eyes were wide open as he angrily shouted, choked with emotions and cursed at everything in the world. However, as the golden light rose and went, its dazzling brilliance pierced the pupils of his eyes, causing mottled specks of light to flicker. It was over. The strong wind stopped. Dead silence reigned. The pale-faced Chu Wanning stood on his knees, the haggard Shi Mingjing was on his knees. His spiritual energy slowly faded. After a while, they all heard a dull rumbling sound coming from the direction of the mountain in the distance that should be the sound of Taxian Jun's corpse turning into dust. Shimei stared at Chu Wanning, the intense emotions on his face disappeared after the battle. His hatred and anger were all broken, revealing a trace of fear. He didn't know what he was afraid of. Fear that he was able to kill Mo Ran with his own hands. Fear of the future? Terrified. What was there to fear? It seemed to be the end of the world. Shimei finally murmured. Dead. He's dead. Chu Wanning, you killed him. He once stood in front of you in the Red Lotus Pavilion, begging me put the demon flower in him instead of you. Yet, you still killed him mercilessly. You are so heartless. Terrifying to the point that it became a wild laughter in the end. Although he didn't have any intention to laugh, he just raised his head and laughed loudly. Mu Yanli, who was beside him, cried and kept on persuading him, Anan, enough, that's enough. She Mei just laughed. Tears fell down his face, and the golden tears fell onto the ground. He's dead. Taxian Jun has died. Right, good, it's over. Chu Wanning, you can't afford to lose, you're heartless, you can't afford to fool around. Chu Wanning stood at his original position with no expression on his face. He was like a corpse. He looked dead. Shizun, I've underestimated you. Shi Mei's voice trembled. You are much more ruthless than I thought. Chu Wanning remained motionless, as if he had lost the last of his heat. He had thought that Mo Ran had already died, but a moment ago, he had learned that a strand of his soul was in that body, a fragment of Mo Weiyu. But he also crushed that fragment to dust. Yes, he was heartless and he could not refute it. That youth, that young man, that lover who would laugh and be annoyed, or be whole or broken. The only person in this world who didn't fear him, respected him, and tolerated his lover, the one who used his own flesh and blood to protect him from disaster. The one who had replaced him, the one who had been devoured by the 8 sufferings and everlasting hatred flower, the one who had become the Lord of Darkness instead of him. At the age of 16, he had paid the only price he could offer to protect his foolish Shizun. He'll never come back. When it rains, I want to save more earthworms. Shizun, it's pear blossom white, please drink this. It's a gift that I want to give you, but it's really ugly. It's ugly, ugly, ugly. Wanning, I missed you. He had once smilingly learned to write, there will be tens of thousands of houses, sheltering everybody, the world is full of joy and the wind and rain are as peaceful as a mountain. Do not hold a grudge but repay the debt of gratitude. But for 2 lifetimes, he had been floating in the mountains of corpses and the sea of blood. Don't hold a grudge. Don't hold a grudge. I am not ambitious. I only hope to learn some skills so that can save more people. That was what he had said to Chu Wanning when he was still young and was still uncorrupted. At that time, he had hoped with all his heart that he can save more people. Before he turned into Taxian Jun, he had worked so hard and perseveringly to love every living being. He was even willing to give up his soul to thank and protect everyone who treated him well. Although I am stupid, I will study hard. As long as I try my best, Shizun won't blame me for being stupid, haha. In his memory, the youth scratched his head while laughing to show Chu Wanning his soft side. Back then, his bright dimple seemed to be filled with pear blossom white, intoxicating him for life. Chu Wanning closed his eyes. His hand finally began to tremble. In the midst of the blur and dizziness, there seemed to be a cool breeze blowing across his face, kissing his moist eyelashes. It was as if he had heard Taxian Jun's voice, which was both slow and gentle. The voice caressed his ears and sighed softly at his temples. Fame, wish, blood, flesh and blood, heart, soul, corpse, and ashes. I'm sorry, I only have so much. I did my best. Wanning, it's now up to you. He suddenly opened his eyes and raised his head. His phoenix eyes were filled with mist, and in this void, he seemed to have really seen the spirit of Taxian Jun's soul floating before his eyes. His expression was gentle and handsome, and his smile was filled with happiness and sadness. Mo Ran. The soul, which should have been as pure as a cold plum, glowed with radiance. He leaned over and embraced him, kissed him, slipped through his outstretched hand and finally scattered in his bosom like an epiphyllum flower. This is bad. Suddenly, a Tianyan pavilion disciple rushed in as they shouted in panic, it's not good. Mu Yanli was the only one in the room who could still be considered calm. She turned her head with tears in her eyes and said in a stern voice, "I know that something happened to Taxian Jun." "Don't." "What?" The disciple was stunned, then stamped his foot and said, "It's not Taxian Jun. It was at the foot of the mountain. All the sects in the world of cultivation have come together to attack us." End chapter.